Today we are presenting the annual assessments for our first HMIS Quarterly Spotlight. My name is Rochelle Fajardo. I am the HMIS Training Manager. Today we also have Joseph Davis as our HMIS Analyst, and he will be presenting on the reporting aspects of annual assessments. What will we go over today? First, we will walk through what is an annual assessment from the perspective of HUD and different requirements that come with it. How do we complete it in the HMIS? I will be providing a live demo of how to set it up in the HMIS and reviewing a few steps that should be taken when updating any data elements. And then finally, we will end our session by talking about how to review annual assessments in reporting. First, what is an annual assessment? Per the HUD data standard requirements, any clients that's enrolled in a program for at least a year must have an annual assessment recorded in the HMIS within 30 days of the head of household's project anniversary. So that is, it doesn't matter which member, what project start each member of the household has. It is based on the head of household. So here we have an image of a calendar. If, for example, the project start date of the head of household is the 26th of November, there is a 30-day window before and after where one is required to complete an annual assessment in the HMIS. Now, how do we do that? First step is that we create that interim review in the enrollment. Step 2 would be setting up the review type as annual assessment. Step 3 is selecting the annual assessment in the window. Now, I will be demonstrating how to complete an annual assessment. And first step is finding our enrollment where we need to complete an annual assessment. We're going to find our interim column notepad, click it, add interim review, select the household members that need to be included in this annual assessment, select annual assessment. We will be completing this for 2025, save and continue. And that opens our assessment window. Doesn't matter what interim review type, it will always default to the update assessment. So at this point, we have to select annual assessment, and that brings us to our annual assessment. And this looks almost exactly like our update assessment. We have our sub-assessments and regular questions. And the way assessments work is that you should just update whatever has changed specifically. So at this point, are they still living in the same situation? If they are still living at this rental, then I would just leave this as is. An open end date means that it is a valid entry still, and it is current, so we leave that alone. But for example, if something has changed and now at this point they do have income, then I would go ahead and update this to yes. I would open the whole table so I can review the whole thing and locate whatever I need, what has changed. So for example, if they have started receiving Social Security, I need to put an end date here because now this whole row has ended. Put an end date here. The end date should be the day before the assessment date. So if today is 6/26/2025, I need to end it before today. And then now I need to add a new entry that replaces this entry and has the information that has changed. So now they are receiving Social Security, maybe for $100. Also for SSI, receiving income is yes. And the start date will be starting today. Notice that I didn't change that receiving income in the entry that said no to yes. When we change any other columns in sub-assessments, it does carry over in other assessments. So it is very important that we're only adding the end date here whenever something has changed and adding a brand new entry with the new information. Since that monthly amount has now changed, we're going to also update total monthly income to 100. Repeat that for any other updates or changes in any of the sub-assessments. Okay. Now I'm going to save and exit, and we have an annual assessment documented. Another common situation that happens when it comes to annual assessment are late enrollments. So for example, if we have a brand new household member, going to add Stu Griffin to our enrollment, change their start date. Say we're just enrolled this week. Save and exit. So for example, I would then complete their entry assessment, save and exit. Okay, so we have a late arrival, but now in 2026, we are due for another annual assessment. As I mentioned earlier, it doesn't matter what date everyone started in, everyone's annual assessment window is based on our head of household. So we are due for an annual assessment. We're in the window of our annual assessment this year. And even though Stu was just added a couple days ago, they will also now be included in this annual assessment iteration, documentation. So we complete the same thing. So documented as an annual assessment. In our assessment window, we select annual assessment. And then now, for example, nothing has changed. They are still living in the same place. Our income has remained the same and no other changes occurred. So I actually don't need to do anything. I can click save and exit, and this is now done. That completes my requirement for an annual assessment for my household. And that is all I have to demonstrate. I will now pass it on to my colleague, Joe, to walk through annual assessments and reporting.
All right, thank you, Rochelle. So as Rochelle mentioned, we're just going to touch on for a minute some of the reports that annual assessments will affect and some of the reports that you can use to check in on your annual assessments. One of the most common ones is going to be the COC's annual performance report, or the APR. Many of you who have run this report have seen the annual assessment question in 6C that asks whether the client had income at their annual assessments. So you can see that in the screenshot, some have information missing, some have data issues. One of the most common issues you're going to run into with this question is the annual assessments information missing. And that is a result of the annual assessments being put into HMIS not within that 30-day window. So a couple days before the 30-day window, some days after the 30-day window, when you run the APR, you're going to get flagged for information missing, because if it's not in the 30-day window, HMIS just doesn't count it as valid. It's not there. So when you are running the report and you see the missing information, that should be the first thing you're checking. You should look at the client's annual assessment date and make sure it falls into the 30-day window of the head of household's enrollment into the project. Also worth noting is that the APR will also look if you have prior years missing. This is going to be the more recent years. So say you have someone enrolled in 2020, you forget to do the 2021 annual assessment. If you are running the APR, you're going to be flagged for missing information for that client for previous years. So you just want to make sure you're keeping up to date. If you did miss one, you should be going back in and adding the old annual assessments. And then back to the screenshot of what this looks like in the report. As I mentioned, information missing. The majority of the time, it's going to be outside the 30-day window, but it will also be you will also be flagged for that if there is information in the actual annual assessment that just wasn't entered. Maybe you accidentally erased some of the information and left it blank. You'll get the information missing. The other flag you can receive is the data issues, and this is going to be flagged when some of the sub-assessments or the answers do not match up. For instance, if you, for income, if you say the client does not receive any income, and then the sub-assessment is saying they do receive earned income, then you'll be flagged as a data issue because those do not go along. So as you go through the APR, just make sure information missing, you want to look at the date of the APR or the annual assessment. And in any of the data issues, that's when you're going to go into the actual annual assessment, look at the data that was input and make sure it is all making sense, logical sense, and is accurate to what the client is reporting. There are a couple other reports worth mentioning. The first one would be the business objects report. You can see the address on how to find this report in the bottom right of this screenshot. And so this annual assessment report is available to anyone with access to business objects. And this can just help you identify which clients are missing annual assessments, which ones have past due or out of range annual assessments. If they duplicated the annual assessment, did it twice for the same year. And it just gives you a little more information with the client numbers, the dates that these took place. And then it's just a good tool to be able to watch to see when assessments are coming up. The APR is just going to tell you information missing, but the business objects reports will tell you what that issue is, whether it's prior years or out of range, all of those things. So there are a couple tabs. One's just focusing on the head of household, which is where the annual assessments should be started. Tab B will look at all the other clients. So other individuals who maybe were not included in an annual assessment and should have been, you'll find those in that tab. And then the last report that we want to bring up is a SQL report. So this is housed in a different software and it's sent out by one of our other teams. And this goes to all the ATAs every Monday who have these projects with clients staying in for more than a year. So if you do have a project in HMIS and you would find the annual assessment reminder reports helpful and you're not receiving it, I do encourage you to reach out to the help desk and ask to be added to that list. And it's just a way to keep on top of it. Every month you'll see who has annual assessments in range or upcoming in that month. And besides that, I think the only other thing I want to point out again is that if you do have annual assessments that are outside the range of the 30 days, you are able to go in and change the date to make it within the 30-day range. So please do that.
Thank you, Joe. I also wanted to finally also point out that it is really important that the review type that is selected is annual assessment and not a different one. That is what reports are specifically looking for. Other than that, that is all the content we have for today. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you at our next quarterly spotlight.